Hello everybody and welcome back. Good to talk to all of you again today. And today what I'm going to be doing is talking about carriers. In particular, if I had my hands on the rework and I had to, have the creative direction or whatever you want to call it about the rework, how would I have done it? Because I would have done it quite a little bit differently than the way Wargaming did it. Some things are still going to be similar because I do think they had some things right, but there are some things that they really didn't get right. And I probably would have done it in a different kind of way altogether. But of course, there is one other new controversy that has suddenly popped up, which is because the CV controversy hasn't died down yet, we need the Chazade controversy. And holy crap, I think I'm going to leave that one for tomorrow, or maybe a day after, because that is a completely different can of worms, and I don't want to touch it today, because today I really want to talk about carriers. So, back to topic. CVs and the old system. What was one of the few things that I thought was really, really wrong with the old system? Because the first conversation I really had about the whole rework thing was, I believe, November of 2017. So this was when the Let's Battle tour was happening at Corpus Christi aboard the USS Lexington. That was really the first time I was kind of introduced to this CV rework idea that they were going to do. So at the time I talked to Sub Octavia and I said, look, one of the major issues with carriers and surface play interaction is the fact that on one side you have a very, very skill-based element, because remember how CVs and surface ships interacted back then. You had CVs that required a whole lot of skill to play, which made it really difficult for people. And then you made it so that the surface ships could essentially counter the skill with an RNG mechanic, which is how AA was, right? Percentage chance to shoot down stuff. That's an RNG mechanic. And the only other thing you can do on top of that RNG mechanic is control-click and press the T button, which allowed defensive fire. Wasn't fun for the carriers, because what you ended up was, 1 minute you had a squadron, the next minute some AA ship somewhere pressed the T button, your entire squadron melted off the map. Wasn't fun for the CV player, and there really wasn't at the same time a degree of interaction by the surface player against the aircraft, and it also didn't really make you feel like you've actually accomplished anything. So I'm like, look, you have to make it so that when you do the rework and you have CVs and surface ships again, you have a skill on skill element. An element where the CV player feels like they're not getting screwed by random RNG, and at the same time the surface player feels like, hey, when their plane's coming, there's something I can do about it. And this is crucial for a surface ship CV interaction, is skill versus skill. Now, at the time that we were having this conversation, we kind of went on to the issue of, should we have some sort of automated AA? And I said, okay, so let's say you make one type of surface AA controllable, let's call that the large caliber or the flak AA, whichever one you want to designate. And then you have, let's say, the automatic AA, which were the machine guns, right? Like the 20 millimeters, the 40 millimeters, these are the machine guns. Okay, make those continuous DPS. So in the event that you have a surface ship that is being inattentive and a CV player is attacking, then at least there is some kind of damage still being done, right? There's still some penalty for the CV player, although the chances of maybe losing planes becomes far more predictable, because the CV player can calculate, okay, this is how much HP my planes have, this is how much damage roughly this ship can do in terms of continuous DPS. This is how long my planes will survive inside this AA bubble. Okay, this is how I should execute an attack or something like that. That's fine if you wanted to do that, because the CV player still has an element of skill there against a fully automated system, but the automated system is predictable, and that's very sort of a key word. Unfortunately, what we ended up getting is this system that we have right now, where it's just like RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG on top of randomness. It is no skill again, and once again, the same issues that you had in the original CV, system is still present. For the AA ships, there's not really an interaction with planes besides, one, sitting there and hoping that RNG blesses you and you get the perfect flat clouds somewhere that blot out a whole squadron, or two, you're sitting there hoping that the enemy CV puts enough planes into your continuous AA bubble to take enough damage for their planes to get shot out of the sky. That's it. There's no other interaction. Oh yeah, the only interaction being sector reinforcement, which is not very engaging at all if you really want to think about it. Press one key, set a sector, that's it. And that sector only boosts your continuous DPS. Like, that is not fun. For the CV player, I mean, what are you ending up playing against? In AI controlled flak system that may or may not blot your squadron out of the sky. And then once you've dodged all the flak, then you're just dealing with a continuous AA DPS number. And like, that's it. That's really your only interaction against surface ship AA. And then aside from that, the only thing you're really dealing with is just launching attacks and striking. And that, after a while, really becomes kind of old. There's no skill really there once you've learned the very basic of attack, drop, attack, drop, attack, drop, and you figure out like how that plane works, then okay, that's it. That's the end of what you have to do. So how would I have done it? Well, the very first thing is I would have treated planes like planes. So an imagined artistic rendition of it would look like this, where planes have altitude controls. So first things first, this will change the whole aircraft flying thing from two-dimensional space that we have now into true three-dimensional space. This will add a lot of elements to the CV player, because now you need to actually think about how do you want to make the optimized approach. It's no longer just, okay, I'm going to fly them at this altitude, click for the attack, wait for the reticle to do whatever I want to do, then click drop. Furthermore, depending on what altitude you came from, there's certain benefits, pros and cons to the actual attack pattern. So let's use torpedo bombers as an example. Now, if you choose to come in at really, really high altitudes and you decide to click for the drop animation, well, what you end up getting is a lot of speed gained as the planes dive down. They'll pick up a lot of speed, and you're able to make a really fast attack. However, because you're spending a long time diving down, your reticle is going to take a little bit longer for it to actually narrow down into a proper narrow reticle. If you're coming from medium altitude, for example, then you'll gain some speed and your reticle is a little bit easier to use. And finally, if you're coming at low altitude, well, then you have a situation where your reticle will start very narrow, but you won't really gain much speed. And then after you disengage from the drop, it takes longer for your planes to get to an escape altitude, right? Which will make it easier for a ship, for example, to shoot your planes on the way out. So for aircraft, I think this will be really important. They'll have an ability to use their different altitudes to come in and plan different attack paths. They'll also be able to use certain land masses as cover. So for example, if you had islands like this right here, and you wanted to go low and get through the gap here and attack a ship, that could be an attack pattern that you could use if you're flying low, for example, something that might not work if you're flying really high. Furthermore, once you have altitude, aircraft can have additional variables as well, right? Because they can have things like rate of climb, rate of descent, things like that. Because what that allows you to do is to actually allow aircraft to have different flavors. So maybe the USN aircraft, because they were nice and heavy and they had a lot of armor, maybe they're really good in dive. And so if you're using USN and you're playing dive bombers, then that's a fun kind of ship to play. If you're playing the Japanese, maybe their aircraft are more maneuverable. So maybe their rocket planes are better to play, or maybe their torpedo bombers are better to play. And so this allows you as a CV player to now have the whole amount of space to work with. And you also have planes that have different flavors and different ways of being better or worse to play. And in the long run, as new ships appear and threats to your aircraft are changing, you have new ways of planning a certain kind of attack, new ways of playing it with your aircraft, and depending on the maps as well, you have different ways of playing it with them. And in the long run, this adds a lot of replayability to just one carrier, so you're never really going to get bored. Now, for the surface ships, their AA is going to be divided into two categories. You're going to have the automatic AA, which is still the machine guns. They'll do continuous DPS, although, that's mostly for finishing off aircraft, and that's not super effective. And they're going to have the skill element, which is the manually controlled, larger caliber AA. And so this will allow you, and as a surface ship, to feel like you have some degree of control on your destiny when aircraft decide to come and attack you. And how it's going to work is, let's say, you're going to be able to press the number 4 key on your keyboard, because 3 is for torpedoes. So let's say 4, and it's going to bring you into your AA gun control section. And when you press the shift key, it'll bring you to an anti-air reticle screen, kind of like the way your main gun reticle works right now, but it'll have an anti-aircraft look to it. So for example, something like this, right? Where on the side, you're going to have angle markers, and then you're going to have the horizontal marker for lead. Now, your AA becomes a skill-based element. And the best thing about skill-based elements is that at the end of the day, nobody can complain about it. As a surface ship player, if you're going to get attacked and you're spamming away with your AA but you don't shoot down anything, that's your fault. You suck with an AA gun, right? Nobody to hold your hand, nobody to blame but yourself. And it will be the same for the CV players. If you lose your entire squadron because somebody could actually shoot their AA guns correctly in the right place, at the right rate, at the right height or whatever, by leading correctly and also elevating correctly, then you have no one to blame but yourself because your evasive pattern sucked. right? And so when it's a skill on skill, a lot less complaints about randomness, unlike the current system, which is just feels like a giant RNG fest constantly. In terms of the AA gun's control, it's actually really simple to just be mouse controlled, up, down, left, right? So control-wise, it's not anything different than what we have in game. And where the major aspect's going to come in is how much knowledge you have with regards to aircraft types, aircraft speeds, and typical attack profiles, right? If people prefer low altitude attacks, well, fantastic. You can just preset your AA guns at a low altitude, wait for them to start coming in, and then you can start just hammering away at them at a certain distance, because you know, that AA gun, you will know what the ideal distance is, right? So this is all stuff that will come from experience and gameplay. All in all, this will allow AA to have a lot of long-term replayability. And the same for CVs as well, because now the surface ship CV interaction is that of, you know, skill and experience and practice, rather than really whatever the hell we've got right now. Because right now what we have is much the same as what we originally have, just the graphics are prettier and it's different in that regard. But everything else, if you look at the core aspects of it, hasn't really changed in terms of, you know, the fun and engaging part of, you know, aircraft versus surface ships. It just hasn't really gotten there. It's still as boring as ever, right? As a surface ship, it's not really engaging because you're just sitting there going, okay, hope my AA works, hope my continuous DPS is enough. And as a carrier, after 100 battles of doing the same thing over and over again, what else is new? There's no new attack profiles to do. There's no new attack methods. It's just dive down, wait for reticle, click drop, right? We really need a better system. Like, honestly, if we don't have it, I think in the long run, it's gonna suck. And realistically speaking, if we just stick with what we got right now, I just don't think carriers ever are gonna fit into the game, because there's never any way to actually get them to be balanced. Ever. You know, you're always going to have a situation where it's like, okay, if we're just going to stick with numbers, like, you know, let's say we're going to stick with continuous DPS being the big thing. You're always going to have the situation where it's like either it does something or it doesn't do anything. And then how do you account for also tier problems, right? Tier 8 CVs in tier 10 games. Well, if its continuous DPS numbers are too high, then the tier 8 CV doesn't ever have a purpose at a tier 10 game, ever. Because its planes are just too slow and too fragile. So if all you're going back to is just numbers and RNG, you're never going to obtain balance. But if you put a skill element in there, okay, well now everything has a role. Tier 8 CV in a tier 10 game? Okay, yep, your planes are a little bit more vulnerable to the continuous DPS, but hey, if you're a good flyer and you know how to manipulate your aircraft, you can get through stuff. But if you run up against a really, really good AA player in a really strong AA ship that throws up a lot of flak, and they know how to counter your planes, which happen to be slower and things like that, they will be able to knock your squadrons out of the sky. But then, because it's skill versus skill, there's no anger about it. It's like, yep, you know what? That CV player outplayed me, or that cruiser player outplayed me, or that battleship player outplayed me. There's none of that animosity. Furthermore, this also resolves the issues that destroyer players have. A destroyer player today, well, if you know what you're doing with a CV, they're basically at your mercy. You can just go in there with your attack planes, blam, bam, 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 with rocket planes all day long, right? But if a destroyer player was good with their large caliber AA, well, now their AA is just as lethal as any other surface ship, right? Depending on, of course, which destroyer you're talking about. They might have a little bit less, but a good destroyer player can make that AA work, and it can be very lethal to your aircraft. Moreover, if you're dealing with certain destroyers like, let's say, Kitakaze or Akazuki or Harugumo, which are supposed to be AA destroyers, well, they can finally do their role, which is primarily shooting down aircraft with their amazing 100mm anti-air guns. So Harugumo, Akazuki, and Kitakaze can now function as a good fleet escort anti-air destroyer and be rewarded for it instead of in their current really kind of bizarre quarter pen plus IFHE, I'm gonna DPM machine other ships down. That never made any sense to me. And you know, it's just like, you know, when you're taking a ship and you're trying to shoehorn them into roles that they don't fit when you don't have the other systems to help make them fit, it's just weird. And a system like this, with the manual flak A, whatever, you can make these ships have their real role, and they can be fun to play. If a player, let's say, really wanted to play that support role, and you give them a ship that allows them to do that, and they're able to bring down a whole bunch of planes over the span of a battle, and, you know, occasionally contribute some damage when, you know, it was needed, and they were able to occasionally contribute a torpedo hit or two, fantastic. That's a unique playstyle that's very different than what they're doing right now, which is, you know, simply get into position, pop your smoke, start spamming HE shells, and let it rain. Right? So I think this is one of those things where if I was to choose the direction of the CV rework, I would have gone this way because it would have resolved many other issues as well. In addition, it also would have made ships like Harakaze a really interesting ship, because suddenly with Harakaze, instead of just having 100mm guns, the only choice, and don't choose anything else because everything else is worthless, now you've got to make some decisions, right? Because now you got to go look, okay, so the 127s, they're better for anti-surface work, but they really don't do very well anti-air-wise. The 100mm are really good anti-air, but they no longer have that quarter pen because that's not where they're supposed to be, right? That's only a shoehorned rule. So they have a good rate of fire, but they're not really good at penetrating things, but they're really good at anti-air. Hey, but look at those midway guns that they have that nobody really uses. But in this reworked way of doing it, hey, those midway guns, they're kind of okay for anti-air. They have really good rate of fire for anti-air. Their shells do good damage. They're pretty, fast at traversing. And, for anti-surface roll, they're okay. They're not as good as maybe the 127s, but yeah, you got to make some trade-offs somewhere, right? See, that'll allow gun choices to be an interesting thing as well. All in all, when I look at the CV rework, I just feel like it's a missed opportunity. I feel like had they just decided to do things a little bit differently, right? Implemented a little bit of skill on skill, that they could have had a whole new revolution to their game, like a whole new way of playing, a whole new set of strategies, a whole new way of fighting battles. And not only that, but also having whole new ways of balancing ships, creating unique ship flavors, and making the game something that's truly amazing. Unfortunately, we just didn't really get that. Oh, and by the way, speaking of that, new flavor things, what I was thinking initially was, as an example, Des Moines versus Salem. Right now, there's very few things aside from the heel and the radar to set those two ships apart. Imagine how that would be if in a system where you have manual AA, you have the Des Moines, which has the 127s as their main AA guns, and those are the guns that they control. And on the Des Moines, those guns have longer range, slow rate of fire, pretty good traverse, but not amazing. And so when you're using the Des Moines AA guns, you got to really try to engage things further away and be very good at leading stuff that's further away. The Salem, on the other hand, has manual control of its 76mm AA guns. Now those AA guns maybe don't have the best range, but they're amazing at point defense because they have rapid rate of fire, high damage, very good elevation speeds, right? So hey, if you're catching something that's closer in, a Salem is going to rip things to shreds. So that'll allow for flavor differences between those two ships. If you think about all the other nations, wow, if you had the ability to tailor their AA guns in different ways, imagine the number of different flavors of ships from a purely anti-air perspective. That, coupled with, let's say, different, variables on aircraft, wow, now skill and skill interaction can become something really fun, right? Now when you're playing AA, you'll feel rewarded when you shoot down planes. When you are able to knock a squadron out, it'll feel like, wow, I actually did something. If I defended an entire fleet from an enemy attack, I can feel good about that, because I'll be like, look, my skill at knocking aircraft down allowed my team to be able to push up here safely without having to worry about aircraft attack. And these are things I think that really are just not here in the current rework. And no matter how I look at it, it just, like I said earlier, feels like a missed opportunity. So, let me know what you all think, right? What do you think about all this? Do you think they could have done it better? Do you think they could modify the current system? Because, unfortunately, I don't really see how. Because right now it's just filling with numbers, and I don't really think that's going to lead to the promised land, shall we say? I don't know. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section below. Aside from all that, folks, I'll have a Chile Cesare video, because that is another debacle that is just waiting to explode more. So I'll have something to say about that probably in the next video, either tomorrow or the day after. So we'll see. Aside from all that, folks, take care of yourselves, have a great day, and I'll talk to all of you again really, really soon.